If you go to the next slide, Ben. This next one is just about recording. Yeah, thanks a lot. And then the next slide. So my name is Martin Thalmann. I'm moderator of today's meetup. I'm hosting this meetup together with Romano. Romano will do part of the speak today. So for that reason, we decided that I will do the moderation. Yeah, and I'm just a passionate DevOps enthusiast and trying to help other people in their or other companies in their DevOps journey. And beside that, I'm also organizer of DevOps Days Zurich, Romano as well, and a couple of other friends. And if you go to the next slide, I guess the next slide. Oh, no, first, before we do some advertising about DevOps Days, just about the schedule. I do just a very quick introduction and welcome message. Takes probably about 5 minutes. Then we will have the talk run about till 10 to 7, and then we have enough time for any questions. But I guess it would be okay to ask some question also in between. And if I'm not wrong, that's on the next slide. So this is how we do the setting. Your microphone is, you're all muted yourself, which is perfectly fine. I guess we are a relatively small group, so I would suggest if you have any question, either if it's during the presentation, then just raise your hand and then you can unmute yourself and we can probably discuss that. If you prefer to write something in the chat, then feel free to just write it in the chat. I will look into the chat quite often, and if I would raise the question if something comes in the chat. So Ben, Romano, from a presentation point of view, you do not have to look into the chat. I would bring anything that is important into the presentation. And then the next slide should be the advertising about DevOps Days. So DevOps Days Zurich is coming back. 31st of May and 1st of June will be 2-day conferences in Winterthur. Tickets are available. I know at least from somebody that is in the meetup today that already purchased his ticket. Thanks a lot. We will have the program. We are really just days before publishing the program. We just do the really final tests to see that everything is fine. And I guess we have some really nice speaker again. We have Charity Major, as an example, is doing one of the keynotes. We have people from Facebook, from Amazon, so from all the various really interesting talks from many different areas. There will be Ignite talks in the afternoon. There will be a lot of time also to do open spaces. We have a great evening event with lots of beer and foods, or also non-alcoholic drinks, of course. And you can get all this for only $250. So if you want to get a ticket, now is the time to do so. And if you go to the next slide, Ben, then the meetup, yeah, DevOps meetup Zurich. We are always looking for you if you want to give a talk at one of the meetups. If you have a proposal, if you would say like, would be super interesting if we can talk about this topic, but I'm not the expert, then you can always reach out to us, either to myself or to Romano, and we try to find a speaker talking about that, or we can organize something. I guess what's also good to mention is our next meetup will be end of April, and it is about psychological safety. This is a bit exceptional, the next meetup, because it will be in German. So we have a German-speaking presenter, and she prefers to do the talking in German. The slides will be in English, and we plan to host this next meetup physically again. And what we are currently looking for is still for a good place, ideally central Zurich. So if you think like, oh, that's an interesting topic, if you want to come to our place, then this would be a good, please contact me so we can organize that in a nice and central place. And with that, I guess if we go to the next slide, would like this is the reason why we're here. We're talking tonight. We talk about feature toggles, what, why, and how. And we have Ben Rometsch. I don't know if this is pronounced correctly. This would be the way how you
It's a
pronounce it.
Swiss-German name, so
yeah, it
I would
is.
hope it is.
It is, yeah. And Romano Roth, so they are the speaker tonight. And I guess you will introduce yourself, so I hand over to Ben.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so really interested and excited to talk to you guys tonight about feature toggles. When I started this journey, I thought they were Booleans, and in a way they are, but they can be a lot more interesting and complex than that. So yeah, just to give you a bit of a background on myself, I'm in London right now. I do have a Swiss-German family, but I'm living in London. And I started a software agency quite a long time ago now, 21 years ago. It's still independent. And we've been lucky to work with really large teams and really large enterprise organizations, and then really, really tiny teams working with, like, brand new startups and everything in between. And what we noticed, particularly with the larger teams, was through no fault of their own, really, they just found it very, very hard to release software, either to release it at all or to release it in a safe manner that wasn't stressful every time it happened. And we realized that there was a lot of reasons why that was the case. They were often very different depending on the companies we were consulting with. But we realized that feature flags was something, I mean, it's not a silver bullet, but it would solve a lot of the issues and the causes for these problems. So we started building a very, very simple platform about 4.5 years ago, and we open sourced the product, and people started using it. We carried on developing it, and then large companies started contacting us saying, can we buy support, and can you build these integrations? And so I left the agency to my business partner and started working on Flagsmith full time. And since then, we've grown both the open source project and turned it into a commercial open source business. So we have an open product that a lot of people use themselves completely free of charge, and then we have a paid product as well. And yeah, so if you're interested in looking at the source code, contributing, helping build the platform, the GitHub links are down there. So over to Romano.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Romano Roth. I work now since 20 years for Zülke. I started as a junior software engineer in the .NET area. Then I became an expert software engineer, then an architect, and then a consultant. And one thing that was always at my heart was, how can I deliver together with my team continuously value to our customer? How can I ensure the quality? How can I automate stuff? So when the whole DevOps movement started, I jumped right on it. First in the CI/CD pipelines. Afterwards, I also joined the community. Together with Martin, I'm organizing the DevOps meetups and also the DevOps days, Zurich. And because it's really a topic which is at my heart, I also do a lot of video. I have my own YouTube channel, which you can subscribe, and I also blog a lot, tweet a lot, and post a lot on LinkedIn, and you can always follow me. Nowadays, I'm more in the consulting area. I work for different companies doing DevOps transformation and agile transformations. Yeah, and with that, we will go now into a little bit more of the feature flags. But first, we need to understand some of the basics in order to understand why we need to have feature flags. And the first concept we need to understand is what a continuous integration is. And when we look at continuous integration, then this works the following. You are creating code on your local machine, and the code which you create needs to be reintegrated with the rest of the code, which other people are working on. So this is the reintegration, and this is also why it's called continuous integration. So with the reintegration, we want to make sure that the quality of that what you just committed into the source code repository is good. And here the continuous integration server comes into play. The continuous integration server will build your code. It will do the static code analysis. It will do the static security analysis. It will execute the unit tests, and potentially it will also execute some of the integration tests. The output of such a continuous integration server is then a deployable artifact, which we then can use for other things. So that's the continuous integration. Next slide. The other term that we need to know is continuous delivery. And you see, continuous delivery builds up upon continuous integration. So when we do continuous delivery, we take this deployable artifact and we deploy this continuously into a staging environment. And by doing that, we are able to then verify in the staging environment if everything is okay. We do acceptance testing, exploratory testing, and so on. And of course, during all of that, we always want to give feedback as fast as possible to the developer back, so that the developer always knows if something was not good, and so that he can or she can fix that. Now, next slide. On top of that, we can do the continuous deployment. And continuous deployment is always then when we do the continuous integration. We have a deployable artifact. We deploy that fully automatically into a staging environment. We verify it automatically in the staging environment, and then we fully automatically deploy this deployable artifact into production. So this is continuous deployment. And when we look at that, then we can bring changes very fast into production. And in the extreme case, it is you change a line of code, you commit it into the source code repository, and it flows right through all of these quality gates into production. So that's continuous deployment. Next slide. So when we now look at continuous integration and continuous deployment, and this is the CI/CD, which we are always talking about. Here, we really want to make sure when we do this concept that we build on every commit. We run all of the unit and also integration tests on every build that we are doing. We also do the code analysis on every build, and we have automated all of the steps until production. And we also need to make sure that the developer always gets fast feedback. There is nothing more annoying that you commit your code and after an hour or two, you get the feedback that something was wrong, because in that hour or two, you are doing something completely different, and now you need to rethink again into the code that you have committed an hour before. So that's the concept of continuous integration and continuous deployment. Now, next. Now, one fundamental concept that we need to do continuous integration and continuous deployment is the separation of deployment and release. And this is really the fundamental concept which we need in order to bring every change into production. When we separate deployment from release, then a deployment is we bring the compiled or just the code into production with the feature toggle off. And a release is when we are switching the feature toggle on. That's the difference. And by releasing, we give users, a certain amount of users, or all of the users access to a certain functionality. And by using this concept of having separated deployment and release, we are able to continuously deploy into a staging environment, so do continuous delivery, or also continuous deploy into a production environment, which is then continuous deployment. Next. This separation of deployment and release, this leads then to that we can do so-called dark launches. A dark launch is when we bring the compiled source code or the source code into production with the feature toggle off. So when we have separated deployment from release. And now something interesting happens. Because now we have the functionality already in production, we can go and create the whole monitoring, the whole alerting, everything. We can wire up everything so that we are ready. The biggest dark launch that was happening was, for example, Facebook. Facebook released the Facebook Messenger, and a year before the release, there was already Facebook Messenger in production, and this enabled Facebook to wire everything up. They could wire up the whole monitoring, alerting. They could already see how the Facebook Messenger, without releasing it, works together with the load of Facebook. So when they said, okay, now it's the right time to release the Facebook Messenger, they just switched on the feature toggle and it was released and everything worked fine. So that's the power of having so-called dark launches. Next. So for all of that, and you heard it already, you need to have that feature toggle. But what exactly is that feature toggle, that magic stick? And you can see it there on the right side. It's nothing else than an if statement. It's if flag is true, then send an email. If flag is false, then print it out. That's the core of a feature toggle. And this is what we need to separate deployment from release. And this enables us to do dark launches, and it enables us also to do continuous deployment into production if we want that. One of the things that I usually hear is that, but is this feature toggle thing not an application configuration? And the answer is no, it is not. An application configuration is something that is there to stay. It is a feature of your application. It will always be there because you want to switch on and off things. So it's an application configuration. A feature toggle is only there to enable you to do continuous deployment or a dark launch. It is only there until you have released it. When you have released the software, then you will go and remove your feature toggle out of the code. And this is also the thing where you need to keep track of your feature toggles. If you don't keep track of the feature toggles, you will have all over the place feature toggles, which will lead to a messy code, which will also lead to a lot of technical debts. Also, a word of warning, having many feature toggles is also quite a bad thing, because every feature toggle that you add is sort of a test case, and you really need to have a look at them. So it's not a silver bullet, it is something you can use, which enables you to do separation of deployment and release, or that you can do dark launches or continuous deployment, but also use it carefully. Now, one of the things that I always see when we develop software is, when you have these feature toggles, you need to keep track of these feature toggles. You need to know where your feature toggles are and when you can remove them or in what state they are. And what you can do, of course, is, for example, create a wiki page to keep track on that, or sort of a documentation somewhere where you keep track on that. But of course, there are better ways to do that, and there are a lot of tools out there which supports you. And one of these tools is Feature Flag. With that, to you, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks, Romano. Yeah, just to add to your point about Facebook, Facebook probably have the most advanced feature flagging platform that exists, and but it's private. They don't provide it to other people. And we've had a lot of people come to us because they've left Facebook and they're like, this is, you know, a completely core part of our workflow and we can't live without it and we need something, which has been quite surprising to me since we started Flagsmith. So the kind of the vendor space and the tooling space out there is kind of split really along two dimensions. Like a lot of software companies these days and projects, you know, there's the proprietary and the open source. But then the other dimension that we come up against and come across most is this idea of feature flagging kind of for engineers, moving across to on the furthest side, you know, feature flagging almost purely for A/B testing. And one of the things that we will talk about a little bit later is how if you use the concept of feature flags, you get a lot of an A/B testing methodology for free as part of using those flags. And so the most popular folk in the open source space are probably Unleash and ourselves. There's a couple of smaller and language specific platforms out there that are open source. And then on the proprietary side, there's some fairly large, well-funded companies, mainly in California. There's also ConfigCat, they're great guys. They are in Slovenia, I think. And they kind of align themselves on whether they're more focused on the product being for product managers and A/B testers or for engineers. And Flagsmith kind of lands sort of halfway in between. Unleash they're a commercial open source business as well, so they have a kind of similar model to us in that they're an open core, but they have proprietary components too. So yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Flagsmith. I'm more than happy. I don't want this to be a sales call. Really, that's the last thing I want it to be. If you have questions around other providers, you know, open source providers, and how they're different, I'm happy to talk to that. Just to put that out there, because the last thing I want to do is try and sell anything to you. So people generally come to us, either the open source product or the commercial product, for three main reasons. And the reason that we built the platform initially, as I mentioned earlier, was really for engineering teams to increase their velocity, which we saw again and again was being held up by this inability to release code. Microservices that were dependent on each other, that had, you know, there was one blocking issue, mobile apps that couldn't be deployed because there wasn't an API that was working already. So the core reason and the core problem we try and solve is as Romano said, decoupling deploy and release, which generates so much value as an engineering team. But once you have built that and built that into your workflow, it's fairly easy to add a lot of additional value and sort of color around it by using these platforms to not just deploy features, but manage features, manage who has access to particular features based on maybe where they're from or what type of plan they're paying for. or any kind of characteristic that you want to define. And so we really talk about that as segmentation. And then thirdly, experimentation. So like I said, putting a feature behind a flag means that you can very easily test the effectiveness of that feature to your customers by simply, at its simplest, showing half your customers the application without the feature and half your customers the application with the feature, and then tracking how effective that feature is to them. And so these are the three main reasons that that folk come to us and ask us about Flagsmith. So as an open source project, we have a very, very simple, it's kind of boring architecture. We don't have 15 AWS services. We have an API that's written in Python, and we have a database that we use, which is Postgres. And then we have a dashboard that I'm going to show you in a moment that you log into, and you can manage your flags. And then the same API is also consumed by end clients. So that would be the users of your application. We also have a time series database that you don't have to run if you don't want to. There's a couple of features that we rely upon for that. And again, like most vendors, they have an API that you either run yourself or you pay for. And then they have a bunch of SDKs. And those SDKs, generally cover pretty much every language and framework that you could imagine. And they provide a kind of a nice syntactic wrapper around the application, the flagging application itself, to make it easier for you to integrate the platform into your code. So yeah, so we do like everyone else. I mean, we have even like Rust and Elixir clients, languages that I can't even understand the first few lines of. So yeah, and a bunch of frameworks as well, because especially like the JavaScript frameworks can be quite different and opinionated. So just to give you an idea around how sort of maybe a larger team would adopt our platform. Like I said, they're generally looking for decoupling, deploy, and release. So what's most common is and because it can be quite a large change operationally, and in terms of your engineering workflow, people adopting the concept for the first time will generally look to just be able to do that decoupling of deploy and release. So work on a new feature, push it into production, hidden behind a flag, and then turn it on when they're happy with it. And just that simple concept can get you a long way and a lot of value out of doing that. And most of our customers, that's the number one thing they're looking for. But once they're happy with that and they're comfortable with it, the next thing they'll start to do is to be a bit more expressive around how they enable that feature. So that might be a rollout whereby they show the feature to, say, 1% of their users, check that everything's good, there's no increased latency or error detection rates in the application, and then roll it out to a larger portion of their customers. They might segment their customers, like I said, like geographically. They might start adding some integrations with performance monitoring and analytics tools, but it's more around being more expressive around who sees that features and why they see them. And then generally, finally, they'll then look to add experimentation in there. So deploy a feature, test it against your control of the old version of the feature or the application without the feature, and track as an experiment whether that affects the behavior of your users in a positive way, and then trying to understand that. And the kind of the holy grail of this approach is that you sort of then complete that you're using flags all the way through to complete that loop of going from, you know, starting to write the code for that feature all the way to generating data around the effectiveness of it. And so, yeah, so just to give you a sort of an example from a slightly different perspective, this is generally how people write code without flags. There's a lot of pushing things through branches of source code, and there's a lot of different infrastructure and environments, and there's a lot of different testing in different environments. And then quite often there's a lot of times where you've tested everything in staging and you've tested everything in UAT, and then you deploy to production and something's broken, and, you know, there's some API or dependency that's configured differently. You know, so this kind of process that people are probably quite used to. And this is kind of how we look at things with a feature flagging approach, where you're constantly deploying to production. And the safety valve that you have is that you can just turn the feature off if there's a problem, and you don't have to roll back your code. You don't have to change your schemas back to what they were. And so this is kind of like where we're trying to get to. Now, it's not always as simple as that. There can be flags that you put behind complex code pathways that do require a different database schema or API. But, you know, at its simplest, this is what it allows you to achieve. And again, just to give you an idea, this is from a different perspective. Again, why people might be coming, why team members might be coming to the platform. Quite often we see this, people wanting different things out of the concept. So, you know, some people might want to use the platform to do remote configuration, or to you know, leverage the concept with mobile applications where you can't force your users to upgrade the application easily, all the way through to people who are wanting to do experimentation and haven't ever been able to get the sort of the buy-in from the engineering team to set those experiments up for them. And then again, how people would look to adopt in the concept in a larger team. It's generally about taking small steps and just getting to that point where you've got your first feature released under a flag, which can be, you know, can be quite a considerable amount of work. So it's quite common for people to take things in very small steps before they get to their first actual release of a feature through a flagging platform rather than through a deployment. Right, so I've built a new demo today, and I'm hoping that the gods are going to smile on me. So that's my caveat. If everything goes wrong, then I'll blame that. So oops. So let me just do a bit of rearrangement here. So okay. So what we want to do, what we're going to demonstrate is we've got a Flagsmith store and we want to test a new checkout flow. So this is one of the benefits of using a feature flagging platform, is you don't have to put a flag behind, you know, necessarily a new button or a new, you know, feature menu item on your application. You can test completely core concepts within your product, even testing a completely new checkout flow. So we've got a Flagsmith store. I'm not a graphics designer, so it doesn't look the best. But just to give you an idea, this is a very simple HTML application. And at the moment, I can go to one of two different checkouts. I can go to the version 1 of the checkout, which is at checkout v1. And then I can go to version 2 of the checkout, which is checkout v2. What I want to do is I want to be testing my checkout in production while I'm developing it. Because, you know, checkouts is one of those really difficult things to test in production, right? You've got, you know, credit card API tokens that you might not have right in production, and all manner of things. And, you know, if you deploy it and it doesn't work, then you can be losing money. So it's quite a good example of something that you can put behind a flag. So version 1 of our code, which we're looking at here, has no flags. We can just, at the moment, I'm saying I can choose which version of the checkout I want. But in production, we'd probably only have the old version of the checkout. So what I want to do is I want to put this button behind a flag, and I want to be able to control where this button sends people based on a flag in Flagsmith. And so I'm going to come to my Flagsmith dashboard, which is the interface that I mentioned earlier. And so Flagsmith is organized into projects, and projects have environments. And the idea is that you create a flag within a project, and that flag is immediately available to all the environments within that project. So as soon as I've created, in this example, I've created a flag called checkout v2, and I can turn it on in the development environment, and I can leave it off in production. So this is coming back to this idea of always deploying, committing and deploying your code into production, but hiding that new checkout flow behind a flag. So I'm running on my local development environment. I want to test this new checkout flow using a feature flag in development. So I've created my checkout flag, and it's currently off. And I've done that in the development environment. And so as the simplest way of integrating this into a web page, this is what our code for step 2 of the web page looks like. So I'm bringing in the Flagsmith SDK with this line of code, and then using JavaScript, I'm initializing the SDK when I load the page, and I'm providing an environment ID. And this is the one piece of information I need. If I come back to the environment, every environment in the platform has its own environment key. So the browser knows what environment to ask for the flags for. And this key isn't regarded as private. You can think of it like a Google Analytics key or something like that. The API, and this design is the same for every vendor out there. The APIs for the client side SDKs are generally open and public, and they are code just like the HTML coming back from your server. So I'm going to I've implemented the SDK, and what I've done is I've said, if the checkout v2 feature is enabled, then I'm going to change the URL of the flag of the button to be version 2. So if I come back to my store and I come to the checkout page, and actually, if I run the inspector here, you can see we've got some logging here. So when the page loads, the JavaScript is going to grab the flags from the server, and it's going to update this button URL. So currently, we have the button is disabled, as we can see here. And so we can see that in the logs, checkout v2 is false. So when I come and hit checkout, I'm still coming to the version 1 checkout flow, so the existing checkout flow. If I want to, I can come back to the dev environment, and I can enable the flag for the development environment. And if I come back to my page here and refresh, again, the API has been requesting the flags for this environment, and now checkout v2 is true. So the browser's changed the URL for this button, and it's now v2. So remotely, I've turned on version 2 of the checkout flow. There's an important concept here that we talk about a lot. And that is this idea of kind of progressive enhancement of your application. People often ask, you know, what do you do if the API is offline? And this happens more often than not because someone's in a weird network, they're in a hotel with weird Wi-Fi, or they've just walked into a lift, or they're on a train and it goes into a tunnel, and they've just loaded the application, and then this call to get the flags doesn't hit our API. And so it's really important that the application behaves in a sane way without ever receiving this. This is a JavaScript callback. It's important that the application should behave in a default manner without receiving the flags from the platform. That's a really, really important concept. And it's not because the API goes down, it's almost always because something weird's happened. Someone's got a weird ad blocker or whatever, you know, there's some piece of JavaScript that's broken on the page. So that's a really important concept, irrespective of what platform you're running on. So this idea of progressive enhancement. So I've turned on checkout version 2, but I've turned it on for everybody, and that's kind of you know, a fairly simple way of doing things. What I wanted to do as an engineer is I want to be able to test the version 2 of the checkout in production by myself before anyone else can do that. And I want to do that in production because, as I've said, testing a checkout process, the most, you know, you're going to get the most value out of testing it in production. So I'm going to come back and turn the flag off. So if I come back here and refresh my page, as you can see, checkout is false. So we're now back to checkout flow 1. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you how you can change and manage flags for individual users. And so what I've done now is I've said, right, I want people to log into my store, and then I'm going to manage the flags for those individual users as they log in. So let's say I log in, and let's say my username is Ben Rometsch. So Flagsmith also has a way of identifying users via the SDK. And when the user is seen for the first time, they will appear in this environment users list. And once they've done that, you can start to manage flags for that individual user. And they're stored and created lazily the first time they're seen. And this concept exists for pretty much every platform out there. Some have slightly different implementations, but this is the basic idea. So if I log in with my username, and we come and have a quick look at the code here, what I'm doing so I'm still initializing the platform, but when I hit the login button, I'm grabbing the username and I'm calling this Flagsmith identify method in our SDK, which sends my identity, my username to the platform, and then asks for the flags for that user. And so if I come to back to my development environment and come back and see my user list, you can see Ben Rometsch has now appeared as a user in the platform. And so I can now look at the flags for that user rather than for the development environment as a whole. And I can turn on the flag for version 2 checkout, but just for me. So let's turn that on. And this is a pretty bad basic demo. So I don't have cookies or sessions or anything else set up. So I'm going to log in again as Ben Rometsch. And what you can see here is the flag was false for when I loaded the page. When I logged in, the SDKs asked for the flags for this particular user. And because I turned on my checkout v2 for my user, it's received a true value for that flag. And so if I come to checkout now, I'll be in version 2. So now I can test the platform in production everyone else has got version 1 of the checkout flow, but I've got version 2. And generally you would authenticate and add this identify call when you're logging in your users. So all of this stuff kind of happens, and you kind of get this functionality for free. And so that's kind of giving you an idea of managing flags for an environment and managing flags for an individual. But like I mentioned earlier, you can also manage flags for groups of users. So let's say you want to test out the version 2 of the checkout flow for a particular group of users, and you can do that as well using the platform. So let's come back to step 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask people for their age, and we're going to say anyone over a certain age is going to get version 2 of the checkout process. Everyone else is going to get version 1. And if we come and look at step 4 of the code, Flagsmith, again, like a lot of other vendors, has this idea of user traits, which is metadata about users that you can use to drive which flags they see. We're going to use age as a trait, but you can use anything you like. Could be the device type that they're on, the country they're in, the plan that they've signed up for, the tenancy they're a member of, anything you like that you want to use to control how features are grouped by groups of user, you can provide as a trait. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in as myself, and I'm going to say that I'm 46. And so I'm going to log in, and when I come back to my user again here, what's happened now is, again, the platform's persisted this trait of age 46. So I now know this piece of information about my user. I'm going to reset this override because I want to stop. I want to turn off checkout v2, but I want to say to the platform, right, anyone, let's say anyone over the age of 40, I want them to have the new checkout flow, and everyone else, I want to keep on the existing checkout flow. And to do that, we use segments. And segments are just ways of grouping users, and they're driven through the traits of the platform. So I'm going to say, I'm going to have an oldies segment, and I'm going to say if the age of the user is greater than 40. So this is a simple rule, and it's going to operate every time users request their flags. So I'm going to create that segment, and if I come back to my user here, because I've got an age of 46, I'm now part of the oldies segment. The flag is still off for this environment, but what I can say is I want oldies to have the flag turned on. So I can update my segment, update my feature, and refresh my browser, and oops, I can say, right, yeah, I'm still 46. I'm going to log in, and I've now got true because this segment rule has run. And so when I check out the page, I get a flow version 2. And these segments can be, they can be quite complicated, but you can also start doing more interesting things with them. Like, for example, you can create a 50% split of users, and you can override a feature based on that split. And so if you want to roll out a feature slowly over time, which typically without this sort of platform would be incredibly complex, and would require a load of additional configuration of like load balancers and request headers and all this sort of stuff. And I'm not changing any code, right? My code is just saying if this code, this is kind of really important. This code hasn't changed from the first version of the page that I showed you. It's exactly the same code. We haven't touched it. The only thing we've done is we've added this trait and identity information. But the actual core flag, this code hasn't changed. So as long as you're providing an identity and setting traits of users, all of the management and the configuration and the rollout of this flag is purely happening within the dashboard of the flagging tool. So I can say, well, okay, let's turn off the oldies override, and let's say I actually want the 50% override to get it on. And now roughly half of my users are going to get the new flag, the new checkout flow, and the other half aren't. So just by making this change, which took me 3 seconds, I've gone from testing in production as an engineer to running an A/B test against the platform, you know, very, very, very simply. And there's no code deployments. There's no code changes. It's just being driven by the platform. And so there's a bunch of other stuff that we can, you know, that there is available, but they're the kind of 3 ways that you can use to manage the platform. And yeah, hopefully it's given you some ideas about how you could use the platform in your own projects.
Ben, just one question. If I have this 50% flag on as an example, and I want to see later in the checkout process, for example, how many of the 50% users or how many of the oldies fail with the credit card check, how can I create such dependencies?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So this talks a little bit about the platforms that are kind of more aligned with A/B testing than with feature flags. The way we do it in Flagsmith is we don't store that behavioral event stream. We don't feel like that's our job, and we integrate with analytics providers to do that. So we have integrations with a bunch of different providers, and the way that works, and this is kind of this is common to all the providers really, is if I configure a heap integration with this project, every time my user requests their flags, I'm going to send that data to heap. So the value that I saw here is going to get sent to heap as an event property. And so I can then go into heap and I can say, right, I've got 2 cohorts of users, the ones that had this off and the ones that had this on. And then I can very easily use those 2 cohorts to see whether there was a statistically significant change in their behavior. So some of the platforms like Optimizely and Split, they have that analytics piece as part of their product. Some of the other vendors, Flagsmith included, you know, most of our customers are paying a bunch of money to Amplitude or Adobe or Segment or Snowflake or whoever. And so we just pass that data down to them.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
So the gods smiled on me. I'm kind of pleased with that. It was a pretty simple demo. Actually, this isn't working. And it was 25-year-old HTML. So yeah, I'm kind of glad of that. So yeah, I guess we're on to Q&A.
Perfect. Now we are not too many people, so I would suggest if you have a question, just unmute yourself. That should work from sich selbst die Stummschaltung aufhalten. Now it should work. You should be able to unmute yourself and just raise the question. If it doesn't work with unmute, or if you prefer to send it in the chat, feel free to do so, or just raise your hand. Probably just one ice-breaking question again. What is on the roadmap from your side? What are the next features coming where we can look forward to?
Yeah,
Can you say something about that? Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting question, because we sort of keep thinking, well, once we've built this feature out, then there won't be much to do. But there's a lot of work kind of around the edges, I guess. So just as an example, we're starting to be asked about a Terraform provider right now. So sort of strangely, people want to be able to manage the flags with a Terraform provider and maintain the flag state in Terraform. And it's kind of almost going back to coupling deploy and release, right? But they want to be able to couple the deploy and release so that they have that coupling as infrastructure as code, right? So they can go, right, in this release, we're going to deploy the checkout v2 hidden behind the platform. And we, as a process, don't want to be able to go into the platform and just toggle a button and turn version 2 of the checkout on, right? And we have access controls to prevent people from doing that without meaning to. But they want to say, right, like we're happy with version 2 of the checkout. We want to deploy that. But we don't want to just randomly log into some dashboard and press a button. We want to, we want to track that in code like everything else. And so there's always integrations and things like workflow management, 4 eyes approval, scheduling flag releases that don't affect the core platform. The code in the core platform isn't moving that much anymore, but just a bunch of tooling around that engine. And folk have different, every organization and team have different ways of doing things, and they use different tools, and they want to be able to, and so there's just a huge number of ideas that we try and prioritize. But yeah, like it's kind of interesting because I'd be interested to analyze the code base, because the probably like the bit of code that's run most often in the platform, which the SaaS product deals with many tens of millions of requests a day. That code hasn't changed for years, I would guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then we have one question from Krishnan, and it is, what is the performance overhead of querying the feature flag system?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is different among providers as well. They differ in terms of where the rules engine runs. So pretty much every vendor has an idea of a segment or a group and user properties, and being able to change the answer based on some context. When we built Flagsmith, we built that rules engine in our API. So, and to be honest, we just didn't have the capacity to build it in every language, because we'd have to rewrite the rules engine in every language that we supported. Some providers, the rules engine runs locally. So in a web browser, their JavaScript SDK has that rules engine written into it. When they request the flags from generally a CDN, they're not requesting the flags, they're requesting the rules that govern the flags. And then the engine runs locally. And there's pros and cons of that. Obviously, the con of our approach is that there's a latency hit hitting the API. The problem with the SDK downloading the configuration and running that configuration is that all of those segments that you've defined are now public, because the browser's having to have them so that it can decide on what to do. And we decided that we didn't think our customers would want that to be public. And actually, one of the things that we've been working on that we're releasing hopefully in the next couple of weeks is we've done that work to write that rules engine into all of the SDKs that we're supporting. So we factored the engine out of the core platform into its own Python library. That was about 650 lines of Python. And we've rewritten it in all of our server-side languages. So the server-side SDKs will be able to, because they're in a controlled environment that is secure, they will be able to go and get that configuration with a different token. And then they'll be able to run those flags locally. So when you start a Go server, it will go and get the configuration flag data from the platform securely. It will store that locally. And then if you want the Go service to say, right, what flags does Ben get? That evaluation will happen locally. So obviously that will happen in like microseconds. Maybe not, but it will happen really fast. The browser and the mobile applications will never be able, with Flagsmith, they will probably never be able to do that because they're not a controlled environment. And you could grab that token out of the Android APK and grab the configuration data, and all of a sudden, so, and people, because we didn't think customers would, would expect that data would be public. So where client-side applications are concerned, like our JavaScript SDK operates on a callback. So the application, the page loads, the web page loads, the JavaScript engine makes a request to our API. And then when that result comes back, it fires a callback that then modifies the state of the application. And for most use cases, that's completely fine. For server-side use cases, that can be kind of annoying, which is why we've done this large amount of work to build the rules engine into those SDKs. But it's a really great question, and there's the kind of like the hardest problem, which is you're an e-commerce store and you want to try a different image on your homepage, and for every millisecond that image is delayed from loading, your engagement rate goes down some %, and you need to bucket that user as quickly as possible. You can't really get the browser has to go and ask something. What are the rules for this test and what bucket am I in? And that's the kind of difficult problem. But a lot of the other, especially where flags are concerned, and like I said, if you're progressively enhancing your application, most of the time you can live with a few hundred milliseconds of latency.
And then the second question is, from a security perspective, what are the best practices to secure applications? Because this would add some additional attack surface.
Yeah, so that's another really good question. But like I said, by design, the API for requesting flags is completely public. And, if I'm running Flagsmith on a website, someone who's visiting can grab the API key and do whatever they can grab the flags for it. A very important approach is to provide a GUID or a hash for your user identifier rather than something like a incrementing ID. if you use, say, an incrementing integer to identify your users, then someone can trivially write a script to grab all the flag data for all of your users, right? So using a GUID for your user identifier is a really important approach. You can also, and we do have a lot of, well, not a lot, we do have a few customers doing this. They will run the API, the Flagsmith API, in a secure network, and they will basically add an authentication layer around the platform. And so only, let's say you've got a mobile app. When the user authenticates, you want them to get their flags. They'll add an additional proxy, reverse proxy around our platform, and only allow those requests for flags through if they have a valid authenticated user token. So that's one of the flexibilities of running with an open platform, is that if you want to do that, you're free to do that. Like we don't provide that authentication mechanism ourselves, but you would use something like API Gateway or Kong or something like that to provide that authentication layer. So yeah, so you have the flexibility of doing that. But the other thing is, we don't recommend, we're not trying to be a replacement for HashiCorp Vault or anything like that. And so if you're storing configuration data, which you can for sure do in the platform, we would only recommend storing things that are not sensitive. So things like, like which features are available, or just configuration data that that's not sensitive.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. As an architect, I always think about dependencies, and also about configuration files that you also said. Now, when I am a larger company, do I have one Flagsmith instance in my company, or do I have per application a Flagsmith instance? And how can I make sure that the configuration is within the source code, so also versioned? Or
yeah, so it's not uncommon for larger companies to have multiple installations, maybe in different regions. Also, if you're self-hosting the platform, you can run with multiple organizations within the platform. So our SaaS product is multi-tenancy. So if you're running it yourself, you can create an organization for, North America, and you can create an organization for Europe, and and then those. It's a multi-tenancy platform, but your user authentication and role-based access and all of that stuff is kind of separate. So yeah, so there's kind of multiple routes in terms of adding like additional higher level entities to that. There is a kind of tricky problem that's sometimes hard to solve around what defines a project within Flagsmith, because flags are only shared within a project. They're not shared across projects. And so there's a question of like, well, if you're writing a microservice and I'm writing a microservice, and they're kind of talk to each other, but they're not tightly coupled together. How do we, are they the same project, or are they different projects? Or if you've got an Android application and an iOS application, they're probably the same, but one has Apple Pay and one has Google, so that can sometimes be a bit more, especially with microservices. which is kind of ironically, like, one of the reasons that we built the platform in the first place was to manage deployment without having to worry about this nest of dependencies that microservices can generate. How do you solve that problem of figuring out the taxonomy of your service? And I don't feel like we've really solved that problem. We get asked sometimes about flags being dependent on other flags, or maybe being dependent on flags in other projects. We have some customers running, like, you can call multiple environments from the SDK. So you can call 3 environments if you want, and then collate those flags. Yeah, but it can be tricky if it's not, like, and life's never simple, right? Like, it's never clean cut in terms of, like, who should be sharing those flags. And I think it quite often comes down to what the team organization looks like, and if you've got teams that are working together all the time, and, even if they're running, different services, that can quite often be the deciding factor, I think.
Now, I do not really know how to pronounce your name. Is it Buroit? Oh, sorry. Buroit? You raised your hand. Sorry. Danesh, probably. Do you have a question? Unable to unmute. Okay, sorry about that. I checked security. I tried to unmute. Romano, I raised the other question? If you can help me with that, that would be great. And in the meantime, I raised a question from Daniel. Is there a possibility to add schedule-based feature flags? Let's say we added an operational flag in a release to turn off a feature that could lead to high usage of the system, e.g. a reporting job. It turns out that we have an issue and we would like to turn reporting on and off based on a schedule until the issue is resolved. Can you do something like that?
Yeah, so we're literally about to release that feature in the next few weeks. It's something that's available in some of the more advanced platforms. Like, we have a very real-time approach. Like, we don't cache anything. We don't have a CDN. And so for us, it's kind of a little bit easier to do that. And so, yeah, some other vendors have that. We're releasing that soon. Another thing that we have seen people do, which we're thinking about trying to build something a bit more sort of structure around, is this idea of connecting a performance monitor or a signal from your infrastructure to a flag toggle. So in a similar way that you can, define an alarm in AWS, for example, let's say your latency of your service goes over a certain threshold, being able to tie that to a flag. Say, for example, let's say you've got some services that are that are kind of nice to have services, but you could theoretically turn off in the event of high load. Being able to, customers are interested in being able to say, right, I literally want to connect the P95 latency of my service to turning these features on and off. And rather than have an engineer go, oh, the database is about to die, turn these non-essential services off, I want that to happen automatically. So around scheduling, and you can kind of do that at the moment, but you have to sort of do some API noodling around to do it, and it's kind of a little bit fiddly. But being able to have an integration that allows you to define that, within, say, Datadog or CloudWatch or something like that, is something that we're looking at doing more. Yeah, and then using scheduled flags to do things like enabling, I don't know, sales at a certain point in time or new features at a certain point in time is quite a common requirement as well.
Perfect. Now, Romano changed setting. Now it should be possible to unmute. So
yeah. So my I don't have a question really, but more of an appreciation for Ben and team and what they're doing. Like Ben was mentioning earlier that some folks from Facebook came and said we were relying so heavily on feature flags and A/B testing and other things. I had a similar story where I'd come from organizations where feature flags were BAU. There was no questions asked. It was assumed that you're developing a new feature, a new branch is created. There has to be a feature flag to control whether or not that will be deployed, will see the light of the day or not. The current organization I'm working with, when I came there and didn't find feature flags at all, the first challenge for me was to actually get folks to understand what feature flags did. How do you exactly use them in your code base? And for them to be able to build something in-house for something that they don't even understand how to use would have been a nightmare. And if Flagsmith wasn't around, trust me, it would have been a tough battle for me. It took me almost a year now to kind of convince them. So we've been using the open source version of Flagsmith for a while, almost a year now.
Awesome.
And we are at a point where my team's asking me, when can we upgrade to the paid hosted version? So yeah, all thanks to you guys, but I just wanted to show my appreciation for the work that you guys are doing. And
thank you. That's really kind. Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think people who I think engineers who haven't used the concept kind of have an idea about what it is and what it will help with, but if you really adopt it like wholeheartedly, completely, and it's not without its pitfalls, but it like, I mean, we just we're working on features at the moment, and I logged into our staging platform yesterday, and there's a new change request element for this workflow approval and stuff, and we don't even, the people working on the platform don't even mention it anymore. They just deploy, you're just deploying stuff all the time, and for sure, like if we've got a big API infrastructure change or a big pull request that's going to create some new schemas and re-index things and things like that, like we're super careful about that. Like we're not just kind of like, yeah, it's fine, push it into production, but not, most of those code commits aren't like that, and yeah, you just kind of realize, yeah, like if you were in if you've gone from, I mean, this is what we're getting with people from Facebook, and actually they were impossible to satisfy, because the Facebook platform, I've not seen it, but I've had it described to me, and for them, like the vendors that are out there, I think Google have a huge one as well. They're kind of like, well, we were able to do, and very, very, very complex statistical testing that I had to go and look up. It was like PhD papers about it, so it was hard for us to get there. But yeah, it's kind of, I'd love to see it if I I don't know.
So one classical example recently was Facebook going down. So Facebook sign up and sign in going down for us, and we are at that point where developers are forthcoming and saying, can I put a feature flag here, can I put a feature flag there? And somebody actually went ahead and said, okay, can we write the previous question by someone who said that, what if something is going down and I want to turn it off? Would there be a way to script it? And somebody in my team is currently actually working on that, where if Facebook logins are failing, they would actually script something in the system that would send an API call to turn off that feature altogether on the platform. So yeah, I mean, I just only have thanks to you guys for
that's
building.
Awesome. Yeah,
like
yeah, that we have customers who they're like gambling aggregators in the UK, and it's quite common for gambling APIs to go down, and it was driving them crazy that you know, I don't know, someone was trying to put a bet on a football match and they want to use a certain provider, but their API was down, and so they just connected all the providers to their own health check, and then if the providers go offline within a couple of minutes, they just toggle the flag in Flagsmith, and then the odds for that provider for that game just disappear. Yeah, so that it's kind of been interesting actually. Like people have some fairly crazy creative ways of using them when they're, you know, fully into it. Yeah.
Good. Is there another question to Ben or Romano? This seems not to be the case. So then from my side, Ben and Romano, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this great talk. I guess it was really interesting going more into details with these feature flags. So really interesting topic. We will take this recording and upload it to Vimeo in probably 2 or 3 days latest. It should be on Vimeo. We will publish that then as well on the Meetup platform. The next Meetup will be on the 28th of April. Will be about psychological safety. It is not yet announced. We are still working on that. It's probably taking some more days as well to get the abstract together, and then we will publish that. And I hope I see you all latest 31st of May at DevOps Days in Winterthur. Thank you all very much and have a very nice evening. See you soon.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.